And today we're in the fourth lesson, Abraham. That first lesson we did, I wasn't able to show you the slides, and I have thought about that every week since then. I think next week I'd like to go back and redo Genesis chapter 1 so you can see the slides that I have for that. I think they're important. I'll decide between now and then whether I'll do that or not. But today we're going to talk about Abraham, and I'm going to sing about 30 rounds of Father Abraham. Are you ready? Father Abraham had many sons, didn't he? Many sons he had. Well, Abraham is considered the father of us all. In all recorded history, only one man stands head and shoulders above all the others, with the notable exception of Christ. And it would seem more fitting, though, I think, somehow, for Adam to be called the father of all nations, right? But Abraham holds that title. Why Abraham and not Adam, even Noah, for that matter? Well, from Abraham sprang the 12 Jewish tribes of Israel through his son Isaac. And then there are two global Abrahamic religions that owe their homage to him, Christianity and also Islam, through Hagar's son Ishmael. You know the story of the Tower of Babel, right? But do you know the rest of the story? Believe it or not, the tower story that we know of as the Tower of Babel is not the only pre-flood tower story that exists. Now, there are other Tower of Babel stories out there, but for Christians, of course, Adam was first. 10 generations later, the world was almost evil. Noah builds the ark, fills it, he brings the animals in, and starts over again. And it's not very long after that man decided to build a tower that reached God, and that's recorded in the Bible. Now, Mormons, if you know about this, Jared in the Bible was a pre-flood leader between Adam and Noah, and his story takes up when Noah was building the ark, and we'll talk more about that in a second. The Sumerians have have a story about the Etamennonke ziggurat in Sumeria, in the story Enmerkar versus the Lord of Arada. We'll talk about that. The Quran has a story about an ancient Egyptian pharaoh who wanted to access Moses' God, and so he got a man named Haman to build a tower that would go up to access God. And then finally, there is an apocalyptic book called Baruch, and there are 3 of them. This is the third one, mentions that he goes up into 7 heavens. And as he's coming through there, he stops at one level and asks the angel that's guiding him, who are these people? And the angel said, these are the ones who are being punished for their work in the tower of strife against God. More than likely, that's the Tower of Babel story. Now, Jared should be included in this discussion. You may have friends who are Mormon. Someday you may hear the doorbell ring. You open the front door. After COVID's over with, I'm sure you'll do that. Open the front door, and there's 2 guys standing there with white shirts on, black pants, and the bicycles are parked right out in your front yard. They want to come in your house and talk to you. They may tell you this interesting story about Jared. I don't know. But at the time of the confusion of the languages, Jared was a righteous man, and he begged God. He said, God, please don't let my family have the languages confused, because I want to be able to talk to the rest of them. And because he was just a righteous man, God agreed. And his descendants today are known as the Jaredites. And according to the Mormons, the Jaredites are the one that came to America. And they came over in sealed barges. And they didn't hitch a ride with Noah. Now, that's in the Book of Mormon. Take it, as a story, or take it as fiction or whatever if you want to. But that is what the Mormons believe. And finally, an early Sumerian story recorded in the 21st century BC, 21,000 or many years before Jesus came, is a story, a Sumerian story. It's of the Enmerkar, the king of Uruk in Samaria. Uruk. Where would that equate to today? Have a word that we know of that sounds like Uruk? Iraq, right. It would be Iraq, and he wanted to build a tower that reached into the heavens and was rewarded for his effort. Iraq won that war, by the way. And this pleased the goddess Inanna, and there's also, with their story, a confusion of the tongues that happened after that. So this story that we're reading about in the Bible is not the only place that this story is told. And finally, there was the Entomin Nanki Ziggurat in Babylonia. And I don't know if this one qualifies as stretching up into the heavens because it was only about 300 foot tall as the Statue of Liberty, including its foundation, which I didn't show in that picture of her. But that's about how tall this thing was, if you can imagine a building that went up that high, right? And after the fall of Jerusalem, Baruch, like the other Jews, cried over the loss of the temple, but in a dream state, he got to travel to where the temple currently exists in the minds of the people at that time, and that was heaven. He got to travel to heaven, and there he witnessed the punishment of the builders of the Tower of Strife, probably the Tower of Babel. And after this, the languages get scattered, as well as the people in that book as well. So why was God displeased with the people trying to build a tower up to himself? You think he would be happy that they wanted to reach him, that they were reaching out for him. But no, God was unhappy with them. Why were they unhappy with them? Was it because they were building? Because he didn't like the way they were building the tower that they were building? No. It was simply because if they could get enough people to go get enough bricks to build a tower up into the heavens, just imagine what else they could do. And so God knew he needed to stop it. Well, he didn't kill them. Instead, he did a very smart thing. He changed the way they talked so that some person was talking Chinese to me and I would reply back in Russian. We couldn't communicate with each other. There was no way communication could continue. So when the foreman told him to go get a load of bricks, the guy was saying, "What? I don't understand you." Two different languages. And they could not finish building that tower. How tall in your mind was the Tower of Babel? The Bible says it stretched into the heavens. How tall do you think it was in feet today? Was it as tall as the Empire State Building? Not quite, no. Was it as tall as the church building with the steeple on it? You know, where does it fit in terms of how big it is? We generally don't worry about it. We just consider it to be a tower, a pretty large tower, right? Well, tradition holds that it is as tall as three of the, what is that building in Dubai called? It is called the Burj Khalifa Hotel. Three of them stacked on top of each other would be about as tall as how tall the Tower of Babel was in convention. It's not recorded in the Bible, of course. This is the largest structure on earth, and this Tower of Babel would have been 3 times as tall as that, according to convention. So God came down and visited his city. He came down and have a look-see, and he didn't like what he saw, and all the people were speaking the same language he knew, and that would accomplish too much, so he confused their languages. Nobody was able to understand one another. Do you ever stop to think that there are over 7,000 different languages today that people speak in this globe of ours? 7,000 languages. How do we get this many languages? Well, it is common thinking that at first there was only one language. Commonly accepted that all of us spoke the same language at one point in time, kind of going along with what the Bible said. Do you believe then that one day all of us are going to be able to speak a common language? Is this the direction that we're heading? Wouldn't it be nice if we could, if we speak a language that everybody else understood? But maybe the same problems would exist for us as the Tower of Babel at that time if that happened. I don't know. But I will tell you that there are about 7,000 languages that are spoken across the globe. 7,000 different languages today. The deal is, the vast majority of them only have a handful of people who could speak that language. Just a handful. There are 165 languages that are indigenous to North America. 175. 75 of those are only spoken by the oldest residents of a particular area. In the past 7 years alone, we've lost 100 languages. They're no longer spoken. There's no one that knows how to speak those languages anymore. 2,000 of these 7,000 languages have less than 1,000 people who speak them. What's going to happen when those 1,000 people die and their children die and their children? Just in a couple, 3 generations, that language could be gone. It's predicted that over half of the languages in the world will become extinct in the next 100 years. We are fast moving toward having a handful of languages instead of a whole bunch of languages like there were at the building of the Tower of Babel. So here are the descendants of Noah, and their languages kind of tell you what part of the world they moved into. We have Shem at the top, and his group of people who followed him came from, moved out into the Semitic languages. Think about the Arabs and the Jews, for instance. Those would be ones who supposedly came from the son Shem. The languages of Africa, Mesopotamia, and Egypt flowed from Ham, and the languages of European nations, German, Scythian, Medes, Greek, Spanish, English, and Russians follow from Japheth, one of his sons. Now that's convention. Again, no one really knows the truth of that, but we did break off and we did go to different areas of the country, and perhaps that's where they're getting most of this. I got a slide here for you. If any of you could read me something in pink up there. You can't read it, can you? Well, I can. I can read it. I can tell you what it really says. It's basically saying what's happening in Mesopotamia all these years across there. What's happening in Mesopotamia? So it's given a history of the early events of Mesopotamia. What's happening in Egypt? That would be yellow. What's happening in Israel? Notice there's not a lot happening in Israel back at the time of the building of the tower. But the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob comes at a time when the Sumerian culture is on the rise. Just know that. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Sumerians were on the rise. And then the Egyptian culture is on the decline, and it rushes toward its middle kingdom when Moses came along. Egypt was on the downfall when Moses came along. And eventually we have the nations as we have them today. Terah, who is Abraham's father, once lived in Basra. You know where Basra is? Basra is in Iraq. I kind of wish that all during the war that they would have, instead of saying Basra, which they said every day, if they would have said Ur of Chaldees, because that supposedly is the Ur of Chaldees from whence Abraham came with his father Terah. Abraham took Lot in as his son later on when his brother Haran died, when his uncle Haran died, and things were not going so well for his family in Mesopotamia, so they headed north to his brother Haran, and there they settled for a while, and they dreamed of going into a land called Canaan. God had put this thought in their mind: there's a better land for you. That's Canaan, and you're going to go and you're going to dwell there. Now we know that Terah and Abraham worshiped other gods. As early as Ur, they were worshiping other gods. But when did Abraham begin worshiping his God, the eventual God of the Jews? God came to Abraham while he was still in Ur before they left on the journey. And the Bible tells us that they worshiped idols while they were there. God instructed Abraham to leave Ur and commanded him to go to a place called Shechem and there erect an altar to your God. And Genesis 12:7 says God appeared to him, telling him that he and his children would inherit the land. The minute God told him, I've got land planned for you and your children are going to inherit it, that's the minute he started believing in God. Immediately after that, Abraham believed in God. So, Terah determined to take his family to Canaan. If you notice at the lower part of the map on the right-hand side of it, you see the Ur of Chaldees, right? That's Basra, Iraq. That's where they were when they got started. And Abraham and his father probably decided this, but we're going to take our family. It's bad here. We're going to move up out of here, and we'll go back to where my brother lives, Terah. So Abraham, Sarah, and the slaves traveled north to Haran, where Terah was there, his brother, and that would be up to Turkey. I went to this place called Google Earth. Have you ever been there? It is a fantastic thing if you haven't been to that on the web. You can see a picture of the globe, and you can spin down as deep as you want to or back away from as far as you want to, and you can actually manipulate this thing to show you a section of the earth as it looks right now, this very instant. And you can drill down to it and go all the way down to where it's like almost a city map if you want to. It's amazing. And I took that and I pulled up that, and I got this this slide to kind of indicate where it would have taken them, where they would have gone in order to get from the Ur of Chaldees up to Haran today. Now, we don't know a whole lot about the terrain over there, do we? Do you know an awful lot about Turkey and the Sudan and the desert that's there, the Sahara Desert, and then we don't know a whole lot about Jerusalem and that whole area over there in the Levant. We don't have in our minds a good distance measure like we do of how is it from here to Little Rock, right? So I got to thinking that this 1,000-mile journey that would have taken them 221 days just to get up to Haran, I got to thinking, I can show you that. I can take this little map here and I can show you what that would look like if it were somehow in the United States, and we could place city names and everything according to that. So you get a picture of just how far these guys traveled. We know that they left. Haran and then went on down into Canaan. That was the second stage of their journey. So here's the map that I came up with, or here's a map of the journey, just laying it out there like that. Stage one, they went from Ur all the way up to Haran, where they met with Terah, who lived there. In stage two, they turned southwest and went down into what later would be known as Israel. And it was yet another 700-mile or so journey that Abraham took with him and took them down into Cairo, because when they got into that area in Galilee, there was a tremendous famine there. And so he had to leave, and he went down into Egypt. And then he came up out of Egypt. He backtracked his way back up into the Levant. And instead of going all the way up to Shechem, they stopped at what would be known today as the West Bank in Israel. That's where they stopped. And that's where Abraham spent most of his life over here. Why did they take such a circuitous route? I mean, why didn't they just head off straight and go in a beeline to get from Ur of Chaldees over to where God wanted them to wind up? Well, it's kind of one reason why, and it's that big blank area there. There are no cities out there. That's the Sahara Desert, the upper part of the Sahara Desert. And so you can imagine starting out on a journey that's going to take about 1,000 miles to get from here to there, and not knowing where your next watering hole is going to be. The more prudent route was to be stick with all of the water places and work your way down until you get around. So they had to really go out of their way to get there. And here's where I copied those blue lines that you see here, this whole trip. I copied the blue lines, and I went to Google Earth, and I got Google Earth to show me the United States of America on the same scale as what the map was that we looked at to get his trip. And I put that scale down and started moving it around until I found, lo and behold, believe it or not, it's the same journey as if you started out in Pensacola, Florida. You went up through the very bottom of Alabama. You went all the way through Mississippi, all the way through the state of Arkansas until you get to Fort Smith. And then you go north, just like he did, to get up to where his brother lived, or his uncle lived. And it went all the way up to Joplin to do that. And they stayed there for a while, and then they left Joplin and they went down. God told them to go to Israel, so they took a swag there. And they went all the way down just to about where you leave Arkansas and go into Texas, or a little further than that. And eventually they go down into Cairo, and because of his wife and the problems that they had there, they had to leave and come back up, and they settled in Denton, Texas. It's a whole lot easier for me to tell you that path and understanding how far Moses traveled than it is to try to tell you they went up and around the Sahara Desert, because in my mind that thing is global. It's just huge. Well, it really wasn't. It was about the distance that we're looking at here. It would have taken up a little bit of Arkansas and most of Texas, so to speak. That help you place a little bit better this trip that Abraham made? It did for me. The total time you would spend in a car making this trip here would be about 33 hours. If you could drive that long without stopping, and you'd have to stop for gas along the way, I guess, but you could say 2.5 good long days of driving is about the trip that they took from the Ur of Chaldees back up to where they finally wound up at Denton, Texas. They weren't there, but you get the idea. Well, A famine happened in Canaan after they got to Shechem and the altar at Bethel. A famine happened, and of course they had to push down and go down into Egypt. Pharaoh causes a little bit of trouble with Moses' wife, and they come back from Egypt with Lot, and then they settle in Hebron, which is just south of Jerusalem and probably about halfway up on the sea there. Well, it's about this time that God promises to give Abram a son. We know the story, right? He laughed because he said, how can God give me a son as old as I am? It's just unheard of. That's not going to happen, surely. And he laughed because he'd have a son, but for the longest time, no son came. He was expecting it. He was expecting it the next day, but it didn't happen. It was quite a few years after that before the first son came. So they felt like they needed to give God a little bit of help. Sarah brought her servant to Abraham, and they had a child, which was customary to do back in his day. And this son's name was Ishmael. But Ishmael nor his mother were respected in that family after that. They were not treated well. He was not treated really as being an heir of Abraham. Nobody was happy with that decision after they made it. Nobody was happy with Ishmael. And so eventually, hard as it is to believe, Abraham banished them, and they wandered out in the desert. Ishmael, because of that, would go on in history to become the father of the Islamic traditions and the Islam. He went over apparently and came to that place where they have a rock that's there, and they built an altar and a big mausoleum around that rock or that area where Ishmael came. And that's their tradition. Their tradition sprang from Ishmael. In a way, Islam and the Jews really, if you think about it, are cousins. You know, they owe homage to each other for that. Well, at 99, God renews his promises. He said, you know, I told you earlier you're going to have a child, and you fretted about it. You've worried about it. You tried to help me out, but don't do that, because I promise you you're going to have a son, and you will have a son. What I told you years ago is still going to happen, but here are the terms. You have to keep my covenants. You have to be circumcised, and you will become Abraham, the father of many. And Sarai will become Sarah, which means the mother of nations. So God promises a child, had promised him that. At 99, he renewed his promise. Abraham lived to be 335 years old. Now think about this. He lived to be 335 years old, and 99 was only 1/3 of his life. 99 was 1/3 of his life, and Abraham was 99, and was he as fecund? I had to look up how to pronounce that word, but that simply means sexually virile. Was he as capable as a 25-year-old? Because a 25-year-old, 1/3 of his life would put him at 25. So technically, it's not surprising that Abraham had that strength if indeed he was as able as a 25-year-old male to have a child. And then why in the world did he laugh? I don't know. Well, these are the promises God made to Abraham. You're going to be the father of many nations. You'll dwell in the land of Canaan, and the Jews are still there even today. I'll make a covenant between us and the Old Testament and the New Testament. You will be blessed, and your name will be known. All peoples of the earth are going to know your name, and they do. And we today have been blessed by Abraham. We're not Jewish in origin, but we're nonetheless Abraham's children by faith. And Abraham is truly our father as well. God is and always will be our heavenly father. But Abraham is certainly in our lineage. You have any questions? Good. Thank you very much. No, do you really have any questions? If you do, we'll take a minute or two to answer them, or try to. Thank you, folks. I appreciate that. We don't have enough time. Next week we'll have 15 more minutes. So, oh man, bring a pillow, okay?